Hi, my name is Margaret Hall. I'm 67 years old, and 2 weeks ago, I watched my daughter-in-law collapse across from me at my own kitchen table, writhing, gasping for air, her designer blouse soaked in sweat, as my son stood behind her, playing the perfect concerned husband. She had brought me coffee that morning, special coffee, the kind meant to end a life, specifically mine. But I didn't die, because I didn't drink it. She did. Now I know what you're thinking. How does a woman get to the point where her own family wants her dead? What kind of coldness must have crawled into their hearts, into their marriage, into the bloodlines you once held close? That's what I'm still asking myself every night when I walk past the guest room and see the empty bed. That bed used to host family during holidays. Now I see it and remember that's where the police found the vial, hidden behind the cabinet like a secret too heavy to keep on open shelves. I live alone now, always have, really, even when the house was full. You don't expect to survive something like this. You don't expect to feel lucky that the woman who married your only son just happened to sip from the wrong cup. But that's what happened. And now I'm alive, and she's in a hospital bed blaming me for trying to kill her. And the most twisted part? The world almost believed her. Let me take you back. Let me show you how betrayal doesn't come all at once, like lightning. It drips in slowly, like a leaky faucet behind your walls. You think it's nothing at first, just noise, just pressure, until one day the whole house floods. I wasn't born into wealth. I married into it. My husband, George, was the golden son of a cattle family turned oil dynasty. We were married 38 years. He died 6 years ago, quiet and dignified, slipping away in his sleep like he always hoped he would. What he left behind was everything. Thousands of acres of land in West Texas, oil rights that generated 6 figures a month without me lifting a finger, stocks, properties, even a private hunting cabin in Montana no one had visited in years. All of it came to me, not because I asked for it, but because I was the only one George trusted not to burn it all down. Our son, Nathan, was never good with boundaries, never good with no. Even as a child, he'd throw tantrums that shook the walls. Toys weren't just thrown, they were destroyed. Teachers weren't just annoyed, they were terrified of offending him. He was handsome, charming, clever, but something in him had always bent toward entitlement, and somewhere along the way, I started enabling him because I was tired. Tired of being the disciplinarian, tired of the fights, tired of watching my child spiral when he didn't get his way. So I gave in, over and over, until just this once became a lifestyle. Until I realized he was 36 years old with 5 failed ventures and no accountability. He hadn't worked a full-time job in 8 years, and still he lived in an upscale condo with a rooftop pool and a wine subscription. How? Because I paid for it. I always paid for it. Until 2 weeks ago. Until I said no. It was a Tuesday morning in October, one of those rare, crisp Texas days that makes you feel like the world is still good. I was in the study, looking over a quarterly report, not because I needed to, but because routine is the only thing that keeps the silence from swallowing me whole. When I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. Nathan's car, a deep blue Tesla with custom rims and a vanity plate that read PR1NCE, which meant only one thing. He needed money. He walked in without knocking, already talking before I could greet him. I need $100,000. No hi. No how are you. Not even a fake compliment about the new paint in the foyer I'd just had redone. Just a number. 100,000. He said it like he was asking for a ride to the airport. I stared at him for a long time before answering. His skin was pale, his hands twitched, his jaw clenched too often for comfort. "What is it this time?" I asked. "Startup," he said. "AI marketing. We're talking seven-figure projections, Fortune 500 clients. You wouldn't understand the tech, but trust me, it's big." He didn't look me in the eye when he said it. That was the first red flag. The second was when I asked about his business partner, and he stammered out something about a guy from California, no name, no credentials, just a guy. I'd spent 3 decades building criminal cases off gut instincts and missing details, and in that moment I knew something was very, very wrong. "I can't fund this one, Nathan," I said. Silence, then rage. "You're sitting on $80 million, he hissed, stepping closer. "And you're acting like $100,000 is a bridge too far?" "It's not the money," I said. "It's the pattern. You don't just want help. You want me to rescue you, again, and I won't do it." His eyes burned. I saw a flash of something I hadn't seen since he was 13, something that used to scare me when George wasn't home. "You'll regret this," he muttered, turning on his heel. And he left. No hug, no goodbye, just those words hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. "You'll regret this." I didn't see him again until Thursday morning, but this time he brought company. Heather. Heather with her platinum curls and perfect teeth, with her yoga-toned arms and a smile sharp enough to slice diamonds. The woman who once called me Mama and now rarely looked up from her phone during family dinners. She walked in carrying a tray with 2 mugs, and in a voice sweet enough to rot your teeth, she said, "I brought you something special." Vanilla Ethiopian roast, boutique blend, carefully brewed just for me. And somehow, that's what nearly killed her. Before I tell you what happened next, before I take you into that kitchen, into that moment where instinct and justice collided, I have to ask you something. Have you ever felt the moment when your own flesh and blood stopped loving you? Not out loud, not with words, but with silence, with stares, with little acts that whisper, "You're in the way now." That's the moment I lived through, and what I did next changed everything. Because I saw it coming, and I switched the cups. The one meant for my death, it never touched my lips, but hers did. And everything that followed, every accusation, every police report, every camera flash outside the ER was built on that single, quiet choice. I lived. She didn't. And they were not prepared for that. If you've ever been betrayed by the ones who should have loved you most, if you've had to pretend not to notice when someone smiled too sweetly while handing you something special, leave a comment. Because the next is where it all unravels. She always moved like she was performing. Heather, that is. She never simply entered a room, she arrived. Each step soft and intentional, like she'd practiced her posture in mirrors lined with gold. Her voice had that curated softness, too, the kind of tone you'd expect from someone reading luxury perfume ingredients. But something that morning lived behind her smile. It was different. Something waiting. The special blend she brought wasn't just coffee. It was her stage, her final scene, the moment she expected the curtain to drop and for me to collapse with it. But it didn't happen, because I never drank it. Instead, I watched her drink, and when she did, the act slipped. The glitter in her voice dulled. Her performance cracked around the edges like cheap porcelain. She coughed, once, then again, and then it began, violent, sharp, unstoppable. Her body jerking forward, her arms flailing to hold on to something, anything. Her throat turned red, Her eyes watered. She looked terrified. And I just sat there. I didn't move, not at first, because I was watching, not just her symptoms, but the man standing behind her. Nathan, my son. He looked frozen, not panicked, not confused, just suspended, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing, as if he had imagined the script one way and the actors had swapped lines. My gut twisted in a way that had nothing to do with fear. They'd done this together. He had known. This wasn't an accident. She whispered "hospital" between gasps. Her voice was raw, torn. Her eyes locked onto mine with a look I'll never forget. It wasn't pain. It was blame. And for a flash, less than a heartbeat, I saw it in her. The recognition. The moment she realized the wrong person drank the poison. Nathan rushed her to the car. I followed, but not out of concern. I needed to see what they'd do next. Would they confess? Would they slip? Would the guilt peek through? But they didn't cry. They didn't apologize. They didn't say a word about the coffee. They played their roles too well. In the ER, she got the care she needed. Nurses swarmed. Monitors beeped. The usual chaos unfolded. Nathan played the worried husband to perfection, and when the doctor asked her what had happened, she rasped out one word, "Coffee," and looked at me. They had already decided. If she survived, I'd be the villain. If she died, I'd be the story on the news. Wealthy widow poisons son's wife in bitter inheritance dispute. Even then, sitting under sterile hospital lights, I could feel it all locking into place. The setup, the show, the final act, perfectly rehearsed, except the wrong woman drank the poison. And that mistake? That was the only reason I was still breathing. But how do you prove what almost happened? How do you prove that you were meant to be the one who died? The doctor called in the police, and I knew if I didn't fight this, I was going to prison, or worse. When the detective arrived, I didn't panic. His name was Mason Wyatt. Early 40s, clear eyes, sharp jawline, and the kind of voice that had spent too much time asking grieving families if they had any enemies. He shook my hand gently, like he was already picturing me in cuffs. "Mrs. Hall," he said, "I'd like to ask you a few questions." "Of course." "In private, if that's all right." We moved to a consultation room, white walls, one chair too many, and the smell of hand sanitizer that clung to your skin. "I want to be clear, you're not under arrest, but your daughter-in-law claims you served her a beverage that may have been contaminated." "Did she say the word poison?" I asked. "Not yet, but her symptoms suggest some kind of chemical exposure, possibly cyanide." The word hit like ice. Cyanide, that smell, the bitter almond scent in the coffee. It all made sense now. "Can you tell me what happened this morning?" he asked. And I did. Every word. The visit, the coffee, the switch I made when she wasn't looking. "And you're saying she prepared the coffee?" "She walked in with it, 2 cups. Said it was special." He took notes silently. His face gave nothing away. "May I ask, why would she do something like that?" I paused. Because the real answer was sitting in a vault full of trust documents, real estate deeds, and a will that left everything to me and to Nathan, eventually, if I died. "She and my son have money issues," I said carefully. "Nathan asked me for a loan 2 days ago. $100,000. I said no." His eyes flickered up. "And how did he respond to that?" "Badly. He left angry. And now Here we are? Detective Wyatt leaned back. I'm going to need access to your home, he said. Kitchen primarily, anywhere the coffee might have been prepared. I'll also need any text communication between you and your son this week. I understand. And Mrs. Hall, if there's anything else you're not telling me, now would be the time. I met his gaze, steady, unshaken. I have nothing to hide. And I meant it, because I didn't. But my son? He was drowning in secrets, and I intended to drag every single one of them into the light. The drive back to my house that afternoon felt longer than usual. I didn't speak. Detective Wyatt sat in the passenger seat, scribbling in his notebook as we pulled past the gates of my estate. The wrought iron arch that once felt like protection now felt like the entrance to a stage, because I realized something chilling. Everything from this point forward would be interpreted. Every drawer they opened, every word I said, every pause in my breath would be a cue, a clue. I was no longer a person. I was a suspect. And the script was already written. The kitchen still smelled faintly like vanilla. Heather had placed the mugs on a silver tray, complete with little linen napkins folded into perfect fans. A show. Always a show. The officers dusted the counter for prints, while another began photographing everything. My spice rack, my coffee maker, even the salt dish I hadn't refilled in 2 weeks. Every drawer creaked open, like it was confessing something. "Mrs. Hall," one officer said, "can you show us where you keep your coffee beans?" "In here," I replied, leading them to the cabinet beside the fridge. They found 6 bags, all sealed, labeled, ordinary, most from a boutique shop downtown, the same one Heather had named. Detective Wyatt took them, bagged them. Then he turned to me. "Any chance we could see your cleaning supplies?" I led him to the utility closet. Bleach, ammonia, disinfectants, the usual. "Do you know if anyone else has had access to your home recently?" he asked as he examined the bottles. I hesitated, because I remembered something. 2 nights ago, I said, Nathan was here. I didn't answer the door, but the cameras picked him up. He walked around the house, tried the doors. "Why didn't you let him in?" "Because I didn't trust him." He nodded slowly, as if that piece clicked into some private puzzle. "We'll need to review your security footage," he said. "Do you have a system?" "Yes, everything's saved. I haven't touched it since." They pulled the footage from my laptop and transferred it onto a hard drive. The timestamp showed exactly what I'd said. Nathan's car pulling up at 2:47 a.m. He knocked softly, then circled the house, tried the back door, the windows. He wasn't looking for a conversation. He was scouting. And I didn't realize until that moment how close I had come to letting the wolf
after they left
back
with
in
their
the
evidence
house.
bags and polite nods, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood in the kitchen, right where she'd stood. I stared at the spot on the marble countertop where her tray had been, and I wondered, when had she decided to kill me? Was it before the wedding? When she realized I controlled Nathan's inheritance? Or was it gradual, death by resentment, brewed slowly in the shadows? She was beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that's bought, not built. Her cheekbones weren't God-given. They were paid for in monthly installments. Her voice wasn't warm, it was rehearsed. And that morning, when she smiled and handed me the cup, I remembered thinking, she doesn't look nervous. She looks expectant. That's the detail that stayed with me, that she thought she'd won already. And for the first time in days, I smiled, because she hadn't. The next morning, everything changed. Detective Wyatt called. His voice was clipped, tense. "We found something in your guest bathroom."
My stomach dropped. I haven't used that room in weeks. It wasn't hidden well. Behind the cabinet, small vial, traces of cyanide, and a list. What kind of list? Dosage calculations, names. My name? I didn't ask. I already knew the answer. It matches your handwriting, he added quietly. The world tilted. My knees nearly gave out. It's not mine, I whispered. I never wrote anything like that. I believe you, he said. But he didn't say it like a promise. He said it like an obligation. The guest bathroom was rarely touched. I kept it clean for holiday visitors or last-minute stays. The last person to use it publicly was Heather, 3 weeks ago, after Nathan's birthday dinner. She excused herself to fix her makeup, spent 15 minutes in there. I thought nothing of it at the time, but now I saw it clearly. She had prepared the scene, planted the seeds. She wasn't just trying to kill me. She was trying to bury me in a narrative. One where the grieving mother loses her mind, poisons her daughter-in-law out of jealousy, rage, control. And I had almost walked straight into it. I called Harrison that afternoon. Harrison Blake, my old trial partner, the only man I ever trusted in a courtroom. He answered on the third ring. Margaret? It's happening again, I said. What is? They're trying to frame me. What did Nathan do? I told him everything. The coffee, the hospital, the vial, the handwriting. And when I finished, he didn't hesitate. Get a lawyer, he said. A good one. Now. Do you think they'll arrest me? If they can pin intent, they might try. But listen to me. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Why? Because this isn't their first time playing this game. I froze. What do you mean? I'll dig, but I've got a hunch. People don't leap from emotional manipulation to attempted murder overnight. They escalate. And if Heather's behind this, she's done it before. Done what? Destroyed someone. Quietly, carefully. He paused. Maybe even permanently. That night, I didn't sleep. Not a wink. I walked the halls of my home like a ghost, passing the walls where baby photos of Nathan still hung, staring at the faces I once loved. But they weren't memories anymore. They were warnings. Every frame, every smile, all reminders of what love should be, and what it can become when poisoned by greed. I passed the guest bathroom. The door was cracked open now, still and silent, but the air felt heavy there, as if betrayal itself had taken root behind the mirror, as if the ghost of what almost happened would never fully leave. They weren't done. This was just the beginning, and the next move would be theirs. The media came knocking 3 days later. It was subtle at first, just a call from a local reporter asking if I wanted to comment on the recent medical incident involving my daughter-in-law. I told them no and hung up. Then came the second call. Then a car idling outside the gates for an hour. And by the end of that week, there were drone photos of my home floating around online. My estate, suddenly stripped of privacy and plastered across gossip blogs, headlined, Mysterious Poisoning in Oil Heiress Estate, Family Feud or Failed Homicide. I stared at the headline, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. Because no matter what the truth was, people had already decided who I was. The bitter matriarch, the cold widow, the greedy mother-in-law. It didn't matter that I had fed them, loved them, paid for their wedding, offered them a chance to build a life from mine. None of it mattered now, because all it took was one accusation and a tray of coffee, and the world was ready to watch me burn. Nathan hadn't called since the hospital, not even once. The boy who used to cry when I left him at daycare had vanished. In his place stood a man who'd said nothing while his wife pointed a shaking finger and whispered, "She did this." I told Harrison everything about the media, the drones, the silence. He didn't sound surprised. "I did some digging," he said, his voice low and focused. "You were right to call me. Nathan's drowning. The business pitch, smoke and mirrors. He's got creditors circling him like buzzards." "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that 100,000 wouldn't have covered the hole. He's behind on taxes, owes over 40 grand to an unregistered crypto exchange, and had a line of credit revoked last month. Oh, and he tried to transfer your property title 3 weeks ago. Failed, thank God." "What?" My voice cracked. "Through a power of attorney form. Forged signature. The notary caught it. But it tells us something." "What?" "He's desperate, and that makes him dangerous." I felt the breath squeeze out of me like a deflated tire. Nathan, my son, my only child, forging my signature to take my land before I was even cold in the ground. I had spent my whole life giving him things, and now he wanted the only thing I hadn't handed over yet, my death. But the question remained, how far would he go? I asked Harrison to check into Heather's background. She had always been a mystery, even before the wedding. Too polished, too curated, every story rehearsed, every tear measured. And those eyes, those ice-cold eyes that never laughed, only smiled. Harrison called back the next morning. "I found something," he said. My stomach clenched. "Her maiden name's not Collins, it's Hawthorne." "So?" "She changed it after a lawsuit 3 years ago, in Illinois." "What kind of lawsuit?" "Wrongful death." The line went silent between us. I could hear my own breath, steady but shallow. "She was living with a man," Harrison continued. "Older, wealthy, claimed to be engaged. His family didn't like her, said she isolated him, got him to change his will. Then one day he fell down the stairs." My hand went numb. "Case never went to trial, settled quietly. His death was ruled accidental, but his sister still swears it wasn't." I sank into the kitchen chair. A dozen images flashed through my mind. Heather's long fingers around a wine glass, her soft voice she once
always
asked,
sweet when others
"So
were
how
around."
long does a will take to process after someone passes?" And I'd laughed, like a fool. "How did we not know this?" I whispered. "She buried it. Deep. New name, new story. You weren't supposed to find it." "But we did. And we'll keep going," Harrison said. "We're not just going to clear your name, Margaret. We're going to burn theirs to the ground." That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. Not because I wanted vengeance, but because I needed strength. Because there is a grief no funeral prepares you for. When your child is still alive, but the love between you is dead. I sat in the dark, in the same chair I once rocked Nathan to sleep in as a baby, and I whispered the only words I had left. "God, show me what I didn't want to see." And maybe he did. Because the next day, I got a call from someone unexpected. A nurse from Mercy General Hospital. She asked to meet, off the record. We met in a diner on the edge of town, far from the eyes of reporters and drones. She was nervous, young, eyes darting to the door every few minutes. "You don't know me," she said, "but I was on duty the day your daughter-in-law came in. I remember. I saw her switch IV lines." "What?" "She was alone in the room for a moment. Said she needed to adjust something for comfort. But I checked after. The primary drip wasn't what we ordered. She swapped it back quickly, but I saw it." Why didn't you report it? Because I couldn't prove it, and I didn't want to lose my job. But after hearing what's happening to you, I couldn't stay quiet. I didn't cry, but something inside me cracked open. She had tried to manipulate her own treatment, to fake symptoms, to buy herself more time as a victim while the police built a case around me. This wasn't just attempted murder. This was a performance, a full-blown theater of lies, and I was done sitting in the audience. That evening, I gave Harrison everything, my security footage, the nurse's contact, and even my will. If anything happens to me, I told him, I want it on the record. Nathan is to receive nothing, not a dime, not a parcel of land. You're sure? I've never been more sure. He nodded, and for the first time, I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't just helping a friend anymore. He was preparing for war, and when the time came, we'd make sure the world knew who was really behind the cup that almost killed me, and who drank their own poison in the end. It was Sunday morning when they came back, Nathan and Heather, like nothing had happened, like no ambulance had been called, no police had walked through the kitchen with gloved hands, no accusations had been hurled across sterile hospital corridors. Heather wore a turtleneck, an elegant beige cashmere that framed her jawline like armor. Her makeup was lighter than usual. No lipstick, no mascara. She wanted to look vulnerable, sweet, fragile. Nathan stood behind her with a blank expression. They hadn't called in advance. They didn't ask to come in. They just arrived. Heather looked at me the way someone might look at a forgotten photograph, nostalgic, removed, distant. "Margaret," she said softly, "can we come in, just for a minute?" I didn't move, because something in me knew this was the real performance, not the hospital, not the tears, not the stories for the police. This moment, right here, was the climax they had planned, the emotional plea, the last attempt to manipulate their way back into my trust, and possibly finish what they started. "I'd rather talk outside," I said. Maybe even
Heather
insulted.
blinked.
Surprised.
Nathan didn't say a word, just nodded. We sat at the wrought iron table near the garden. The wind was light, the sky gray, a faint chill in the air, the kind of weather that made everything feel like an omen. Heather folded her hands in her lap, playing the innocent wife. "I just wanted to say how sorry I am," she began, "for how everything looked, for how the police treated you." I said nothing. "I never meant for it to go so far," she continued. "I was scared, confused, and the media, God, they spun it like a soap opera." She smiled weakly, brushing non-existent tears from her lashes. "But I know you didn't mean to hurt me." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't mean to?" I asked. Her expression flickered, just for a second. And in that flicker, I saw it. The irritation, the frustration, the heat behind the frost. "You know what I mean," she corrected quickly. "I drank the wrong cup. That's what we think happened, right?" I leaned forward slowly, folding my fingers on the table. "What do you think happened, Heather?" She hesitated, then gave the same answer anyone gives when they're cornered. "I don't know." The words hung there, cowardly, weak, but calculated. "I don't know" was the only safe sentence when everything else could be used in court. And Nathan? He still hadn't spoken. He just stared at the rosemary bushes like they held answers he couldn't face. I turned to him. "Nathan," I said gently, "you tried to break into my house 2 nights before the coffee." He flinched. I just needed to talk to you. At 3 a.m.? I didn't want Heather to know I was asking for money. Heather's eyes snapped toward him.
A mistake, a fracture. I told you to be honest about it, she said quickly, but it was too late. The curtain had slipped. The illusion of unity was gone. And suddenly, I realized something chilling. They weren't on the same page anymore. They were improvising, desperate, and it showed. I stood up. I think we're done here, I said. Heather looked wounded. Nathan looked relieved, as if someone had finally ended a play he no longer wanted to perform in. But just as they turned to leave, I said one last thing. "Nathan," I called. He paused. "When the police come back, and they will, I hope you remember who taught you how to tie your shoes, who drove you to school when you were too scared to walk in, who paid off your first DUI before anyone knew." His shoulders stiffened. "I hope you remember," I finished, "that I loved you more than anyone else on this earth ever could. And that's why what you did is going to haunt you long after this house is gone." He didn't turn back. He didn't say a word. They walked to their car in silence. And I watched them disappear down the driveway like shadows at sundown, fading, but never quite gone. 2 days later, Detective Wyatt called again. "We've got something," he said. My heart skipped. He continued. "The coffee mug you didn't drink, it had a residue, not just caffeine, but trace elements consistent with cyanide. And the mug Heather drank from? Clean." My breath caught. "She brought both mugs in." "We know." "And she never intended to drink hers." "She didn't," he confirmed. "Not until you swapped them." A long silence passed between us. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "There's more. We've pulled Nathan's call records. He contacted a man named Mark Phelps the night before the incident." The name chilled me. Harrison had mentioned it before. A name tied to crypto fraud, offshore laundering, even an FBI watch list. What was the call about? It lasted 48 minutes. We're getting a subpoena for transcripts. I pressed my palm to my chest, grounding myself. "Mrs. Hall," Wyatt said, gentler now. "I believe you. I think this entire thing was orchestrated to look like you were the one poisoning her. But they slipped. They got greedy. Do you have enough to arrest them?" "Not yet, but we're close." I hung up, hands trembling, not from fear, from fury. They had tried to end my life, and now the story they wrote to bury me was turning into the evidence that would bury them. That evening, I met Harrison at his office, a quiet law firm tucked into a second-story walk-up with dark wood shelves and the smell of dust and justice. We sat across from each other in a silence only old friends can share. "You ready for this?" he asked. I nodded. "We go public next week. We issue a statement. We release the timeline, the mug swap, the forged POA, Heather's past, Nathan's debts, everything. And if the media twists it again," he smiled, "they won't, because we're giving them something they didn't have before." "What?" "The truth." And with that, we started planning. The trial wouldn't start for months, but their reputations, those would fall much sooner, and all it would take was one final reveal. Because the couple that tried to play God with a coffee cup was about to find out what it feels like to drink their own poison, sip by sip. It happened on a Thursday, cloudless, unremarkable, the kind of day people forget by dinner. But I'll never forget it, because that was the day Heather walked into a boardroom full of attorneys, smiled at a man she didn't recognize,
and realized, too late, that he was the one who held her fate.
His name was Jonathan Reeds, a partner at one of the most elite law firms in Dallas. Silver hair, thin wire glasses, the kind of man who could dismantle a person with words so gentle they didn't know they were bleeding until they stood up and collapsed. Heather had no idea who he was when she entered the room with her lawyer, some polished, overconfident millennial in an expensive suit and a mouth full of bravado. She thought it was just a mediation, a final attempt at civil resolution. She thought she could bluff her way out, just as she'd done in Illinois. Play the part, soften her voice, act like the victim. She didn't know this meeting was set up by Harrison. She didn't know I wouldn't be attending, because I didn't need to be in that room to win. The truth was already seated across from her, and it spoke first. "Ms. Hawthorne," Jonathan said, flipping through a file thick with photographs, statements, and forensic reports. "Or do you still prefer Collins?" Heather flinched, but only slightly. "I was advised to use a new name for privacy," she said coolly. "Of course," he nodded. "Privacy is important, especially when one's past is colorful." Her attorney bristled. "Let's stick to the relevant facts." Jonathan smiled. "Absolutely." He slid a photograph across the table. A mug. Her mug. The one from that morning. "This was tested last week. It contains 0 traces of cyanide, no toxins, no foreign substances." Heather's face remained still. Another photo. My mug. "Now this one," he said, tapping the image, "was not so fortunate. It tested positive for trace elements of hydrogen cyanide, enough to cause acute distress, enough to kill." He let that linger. "Your client brought both mugs into the home, correct?" "She was simply delivering coffee," her lawyer said. "Of course." Jonathan nodded again. "We have surveillance footage showing your client adjusting the tray in her car before walking into the house. She places one mug slightly closer to the edge, marks it. Subtle, but distinct. She was just arranging the cups." "Of course, and yet—" He pulled out another file. "She also made several searches online for bitter almond smell in coffee and how long does cyanide take to work, both the night before the incident." Heather's expression faltered for the first time. Jonathan didn't blink. "In addition, the hospital nurse has submitted a statement indicating your client tampered with her IV during treatment, which may explain why her symptoms appeared more severe than the test results indicated. A performance, perhaps, to buy time, to anchor the narrative." "This is circumstantial." Jonathan leaned forward, and the forged power of attorney Nathan attempted to file 3 days before the coffee incident, also circumstantial. Heather's hands were trembling now. Jonathan's voice softened. "Let me be very clear. We are not in a courtroom yet, but when we are, these won't be circumstantial. They'll be connected, and they'll form a very simple, powerful truth." He folded his hands. "Your client and her husband conspired to eliminate a woman who stood in the way of their financial collapse. They plotted it, practiced it, executed it. But they made one mistake." He smiled. "She didn't drink the right cup." Heather stood abruptly. The chair screeched. The room went quiet. And for the first time since this all began, she looked afraid. Not worried, not irritated, afraid. "Ms. Collins," Jonathan said gently, "you should sit down." She didn't. She left the room, and her lawyer followed. That evening, Harrison called me. "They're cracking," he said. Jonathan said she turned pale halfway through the meeting, couldn't even finish the session. Good. We're prepping charges: fraud, attempted murder, conspiracy. Do we have enough? Once we get the bank records and phone transcripts, yes. And Margaret, we found something else. What? He hesitated. 2 months before the poisoning, Nathan and Heather increased their life insurance coverage. On you, quietly, through a third-party firm, with Nathan listed as beneficiary. My stomach dropped. I never signed anything. They forged it, but the signature is flawless. And the amount? $3 million. Silence. I had to sit down. $3 million. That's what they were willing to trade me for. Not even enough to cover their debts and start over. Just enough to survive for a while. And that's all I'd been reduced to in their eyes. A financial reset. A shortcut. A problem solved with poison and paperwork. But they underestimated the one thing they couldn't fabricate. My instinct. The moment I felt that coffee was off. The decision to trust my gut. It saved my life. And now it was about to destroy theirs. The news broke 3 days later, not from my mouth, not from Harrison's office, but from the inside, leaked from someone close to the case. A blog picked it up first. Heiress targeted in poison plot. Sources say daughter-in-law is suspect. By noon, it was on local radio. By nightfall, it was all over national television. And suddenly, the narrative shifted. No longer was I the controlling matriarch or the unstable mother-in-law with a taste for drama. Now, I was the victim. A woman nearly murdered by the very people she had tried to protect. Commentators dissected every detail: the wealth, the betrayal, the twist with the coffee cups.
People love a fall
the
from
media
grace,
couldn't get
but they
enough.
worship a comeback. And the moment they found out I was the one who had outsmarted the poison, they couldn't stop watching. Heather went into hiding. Nathan stopped answering calls. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd shut down their joint accounts, pulled cash, hired separate lawyers. They were turning on each other. Harrison called with updates almost every hour. She's prepping a plea, he told me. Wants a deal. Immunity or reduced sentence in exchange for a statement against Nathan. Would they give it to her? He sighed. Depends how much she's willing to admit. What do you think she'll do? He didn't pause. She'll throw him under the bus the moment she thinks her future's safer without him. I didn't respond, because part of me already knew that. Heather was always a survivor. She didn't love Nathan. She loved what Nathan offered: access, money, the illusion of security. And when that illusion crumbled, so did her loyalty. But Nathan? He was still silent, still hiding, still waiting for someone else to fix the mess, just like he always had. I walked through my house that night with a strange sensation. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was something quieter, a stillness, the kind that follows a storm when the wind is gone but the air is still charged. I stopped at the coffee bar in the kitchen. The tray she'd used was gone, taken by evidence techs, but the space it left on the counter still felt haunted. I traced my fingers along the edge of the counter. Heather's hands had been there, delicate, manicured, laced with intent. The same hands that once passed me slices of cake on my birthday, that once held Nathan's arm and laughed at my stories, pretending she liked me. Now those hands had prepared a drink meant to bury me, and failed. The next day, I got a visit. Detective Wyatt, this time with a quiet knock on my front door. He looked tired, but resolved. "I have something for you," he said.
I led him to the sitting room, the same room where Nathan had once opened Christmas gifts, where we'd toasted Heather's bridal shower with pink champagne and monogrammed napkins. He handed me a manila folder. Inside, photocopies of a statement, Heather's, she'd flipped. The first 2 pages were filled with legally guided language. Her lawyer clearly instructed her to accept some responsibility, but paint Nathan as the ringleader. But page 3? That's where the real blood was spilled. Nathan was the one who suggested the insurance policy. He said his mom would never live to see 90, said it would all be ours soon anyway. He was the one who asked me to look up how cyanide worked. He asked me to make it look natural. I brought the coffee because he said it would be less suspicious coming from me. I didn't know she'd switch the cups. I swear I didn't. I only wanted to scare her. Nathan said she'd faint, said we'd call an ambulance and blame stress. But when I started choking, he froze. He didn't even help me. That's when I knew I was disposable too. I closed the folder slowly. She had turned, thrown him to the wolves, and in doing so, confirmed everything I already knew in my bones. They had both planned it, but only one was willing to go down with some dignity, and it wasn't my son. Later that evening, as I stood on the back porch overlooking the lake, I remembered a night 20 years ago. Nathan was 12. We were fishing. He got a hook caught in a tree branch, threw the rod down, screamed at the water, said it was stupid, and he hated fishing. I tried to teach him patience. But he looked at me then, this 12-year-old boy with rage pulsing under his skin, and said something I'll never forget. If I can't win, I don't want to play. I should have listened to that moment more closely, because that boy never changed. He didn't want to build. He didn't want to learn. He just wanted the win. And when I stopped handing him the trophies, he tried to take the scoreboard. The next morning, Nathan was arrested. Quietly. No cameras. No cuffs in the front yard. He turned himself in through his attorney, hoping for leniency. He didn't get it. The charges: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, insurance fraud, attempted unlawful transfer of property. The judge denied bail, citing premeditation. And for the first time in his life, my son would be facing consequences he couldn't talk or charm his way out of. I stood by my kitchen window that morning, sipping safe coffee, watching the wind ripple across the lake like whispers of a truth finally spoken. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel victory, but I did feel something else, a kind of strange, painful justice, because the truth always finds a way out, even when it's buried beneath 1,000 lies, even when it's poured into a mug and handed to someone with a smile. The courtroom was cold, too cold for spring in Texas, but maybe that was fitting, because nothing about that day felt warm, not the walls, not the voices, and certainly not the boy. No, the man, sitting at the defense table in a dark navy suit that couldn't hide the shame he carried in his posture. Nathan didn't look at me when I entered. He kept his gaze down, pretending to read something in the folder his lawyer had set in front of him. He couldn't meet my eyes. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't hurt either. Not anymore. The ache that had once clawed at my chest every time I remembered the boy who used to beg for one more bedtime story had hardened into something else, a stillness, a knowing, somewhere between grief and detachment. The hearing wasn't about guilt or innocence, not yet. It was about the evidence, whether it was admissible, whether this would go to trial, or if the court could even handle the weight of what had been unearthed. Harrison sat beside me in the gallery, arms folded, face unreadable. A veteran of hundreds of courtrooms, he'd seen betrayal in every form, business, blood, and otherwise. But this, even he admitted, This was personal. Heather wasn't there. She'd been granted a separate hearing. She'd testified behind closed doors for hours, offering up emails, text logs, receipts, each one slicing through the lie they'd tried to wrap me in like gift paper. And with every new page she gave, the house of cards fell further. Even the forged power of attorney, an almost perfect copy, had been traced back to a local print shop. Nathan had used a fake ID. There was camera footage, receipts, his digital signature on an email confirming pickup. And the nail in the coffin? The recording. A voicemail from Heather's phone. She must have saved it out of fear, or maybe as insurance. Either way, it found its way to the prosecution. On it, Nathan's voice. "Just make sure she drinks it. That's all you have to do. If she hesitates, smile. Hand it to her again. She won't say no to you. She never does." There it was. Premeditation. Cold. Calculated. Clinical. He hadn't just wanted me gone. He expected it. Planned it like a business deal. And that voicemail, the moment it played in court, silenced everything. Even the air stopped moving.
Because
I didn't cry.
Part of me left
to break open. The hurt had already bled out weeks ago, one slow drip at a time. Now there was only the truth, and it was louder than any defense Nathan could offer. When the hearing recessed, the judge offered a quiet word before stepping down. "To be clear," he said, "this is not a final verdict. But if these documents are verified and this evidence stands, this case will proceed to trial, and I assure all parties justice will be pursued without prejudice." Translation? We're not done yet, but it's coming, and it's coming fast. I walked outside into the spring air. Reporters waited, microphones extended, flashes popped. But I said nothing. What was there to say? That my son had tried to kill me? That the girl I welcomed into my family had orchestrated a betrayal so cruel it made strangers recoil? No, I didn't owe them anything. I kept walking, past the cameras, past the murmurs, past the questions. But before I reached the car, I heard it. A voice. "Mrs. Hall." I turned. A woman, late 30s, brown hair tied in a loose bun, eyes rimmed with the exhaustion of someone who's lived through too much too young. She stepped forward, clutching a handbag. "I just wanted to say," her voice trembled, "what they did to you. It wasn't your fault. People like that, they don't stop until someone makes them." I blinked. Tears stung the corners of my eyes, not because of what she said, but because she meant it, and because I hadn't heard words like that, not from anyone, since this began. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded. My ex did something similar to my grandmother, convinced her we were stealing from her, took her money, her house, almost got her committed. Is she all right? She's with me now, but it took years to clean up the damage. I'm glad she had you. She smiled gently, and I'm glad you had you. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights off. The moonlight spilled in through the tall windows. The fireplace crackled softly. Outside, the wind rolled across the lake, the water shimmering like brushed silver. I held a copy of the court transcript in my lap. So many words, so many betrayals on paper. And yet, I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. They had tried to poison me. But what they didn't realize, I had already survived so much worse. I had survived the loneliness of widowhood, the emptiness of raising a child who never learned to love without strings, the silence of dinners where they smiled to my face while calculating the value of my death. But now the silence was mine to fill, mine to protect. And in that silence, I heard something I hadn't heard in weeks: peace. Not the loud kind that comes with celebration, but the quiet kind that follows truth. And that peace was worth more than everything they tried to take. The house didn't feel like mine anymore, not after the trial hearing, not after the evidence, the testimony, the voicemail that turned every whisper I'd buried deep into undeniable fact. Truth leaves an echo. Even after it's been spoken, it rings through the rooms like a bell that doesn't stop. And that week, the echo followed me. From the kitchen, where I once stirred soup while Nathan did homework at the counter, to the upstairs landing, where family portraits lined the wall like some shrine to a legacy that had crumbled behind closed doors. Now, each photo felt like a lie, a frozen frame of people who no longer existed. I stopped looking at them. I stopped dusting, stopped pretending this place still held meaning.
The letter arrived
Because
on
it
Friday,
handwritten, no return address. I opened it cautiously, half expecting venom on paper, but the handwriting stopped me. It was Nathan's, careful, steady, no smudges, no shakiness, the same script I had once praised when he wrote thank you notes to relatives after Christmas. Inside were only a few lines. "Mom, I don't know what to say. There's no excuse. No version of the story where I come out as anything but guilty. I thought I'd feel relief once everything was exposed, but all I feel is shame. I'm sorry I hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know this wasn't about hate. It was fear. And that fear turned me into someone I don't even recognize. You loved me better than I ever deserved, and I repaid you with betrayal. I see that now. I'm sorry. Nathan." I read it twice, then again, and yet something in me couldn't believe a word of it, because it came too late. Not before the coffee, not when I begged him to come clean, not when he saw me being investigated and chose silence over truth. No, this wasn't remorse. This was a performance for the sentencing, a soft plea for leniency, an echo of the same entitlement that had once convinced him love was a weapon to be wielded when convenient. And maybe I would have pitied him. Maybe, if I hadn't looked death in the face that morning and realized he would have watched me die with that same blank stare I saw in court. The neighbors began to call again, some curious, some well-meaning, most hesitant, as if betrayal was contagious, as if walking into my house would stain them too. "I just can't believe it," one of them said. "He always seemed so charming, so polite." "They always do," I replied, because that's the thing about manipulation. It rarely wears its real face in public. It smiles, it flatters, it blends in, until the moment you say no. And that's when it bares its teeth. That weekend, I received a voicemail from Heather's attorney. She was asking to meet, privately. "I believe she wants to apologize," he said, in person. I almost laughed. Heather? Apologizing? She couldn't even say thank you without rehearsing it in a mirror. But something about the request intrigued me, not because I wanted her apology, but because I wanted to look into her eyes and see, was there anything left of her that still resembled a human being? I agreed. We scheduled it for Monday. Neutral ground, a lawyer's office downtown. No press, no police, just me, and the woman who almost killed me. I arrived early, not because I was anxious, but because I wanted to control the room, to sit first, to settle, to watch her walk in, not the other way around. The office was sterile, designed with glass walls and expensive silence. The receptionist offered me a water I didn't touch. I sat on a black leather chair across from a sleek table stacked with law journals, flipping through a few pages without reading a word. Then the door clicked. She stepped in. Heather. Slower than I remembered. Thinner. Her face no longer carved by highlighter and concealer, but by stress. Hair pulled back too tightly. Eyes heavy with something that resembled remorse. But not quite. Her lawyer followed. He gestured to a private conference room. I stood and walked in without a word. The room was small, soundproofed, painted the color of caution. We sat across from each other, no table between us, just two chairs, too close, with too much history in the space between. She spoke first. "Thank you for agreeing to see me."
Because
Apologies are
answer.
like arrows.
Not
You
yet.
wait to see which way they're pointed before you decide to lower your shield. She looked down at her hands. No rings, no watch, stripped of adornment, stripped of everything, really. "I know it doesn't mean anything at this point," she said, "but I need to say it anyway." She looked up. "I'm sorry." I tilted my head slightly. "For what?" Her breath caught. "For hurting you, for deceiving you, for being part of something that could have ended your life." "Could have?" My jaw clenched. "Say it correctly," I said. She blinked. "You didn't just hurt me, Heather, you tried to kill me." She winced, but I didn't let her look away. "You put poison in my coffee. You watched me lift the cup to my lips. You smiled. You weren't panicking. You weren't afraid. You were hoping it would work." Her eyes brimmed. But I'd seen those tears before. She knew how to make them appear. I didn't think it would go that far," she whispered. "Then you're either a liar or an idiot," I replied coldly. "Because you researched it. You dosed it. You brought it. And if I hadn't trusted my gut, you'd be standing over my casket right now, telling people how sudden it all was, how tragic." She nodded slowly. The tears spilled over. "I know." "No, you don't know," I snapped. "You think this is about guilt. It's not. This is about cowardice. You got caught. That's what you're sorry for." "I was scared of Nathan," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "He pushed it. He planned it. I thought if I didn't help him, he'd ruin me. Or leave." "Don't lie to me." She froze. "I've seen you, Heather. I watched you manipulate him, twist him, feed his weaknesses until they became weapons pointed at everyone around you. You weren't afraid of him. You used him." "I didn't want to kill you," she whispered, a little too late. "It was supposed to just scare you, make you weak, so you'd sign the trust over." "And then what?" I asked. "Watch me fade away while you played grieving daughter-in-law in pearls and Chanel?" She looked away, and that was all I needed. "You're not sorry," I said, standing. "You're terrified." "I'm trying," she said weakly. "I'm trying to be honest, to take responsibility." "No," I said. "You're trying to control the damage, just like you always have." I walked to the door, hand on the knob, and paused. "Do you know what real remorse is, Heather?" She didn't answer. "It's silence. It's not seeking redemption from the people you harmed. It's not begging for comfort. It's disappearing. It's stepping aside and accepting the wreckage you created without asking for applause for doing so." I turned. "I don't forgive you." Her breath caught. I meant it, not out of hate, but out of clarity, because forgiveness is a gift for those who want to change, and she didn't want to change. She just wanted to survive the fallout. Outside, the sky was blue, a cruel contrast to the storm she'd tried to bring into my life. I walked to my car, hands steady, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt something lift, not because she'd apologized, but because I'd faced her, without fear, without softness, without 1 ounce of the naivety she had once mistaken for weakness, and in doing so, I had taken something back. My power, my name, my narrative. She had nearly poisoned me, but today, I was the antidote. After that meeting, I didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. Not Harrison, not the neighbors, not the journalists still emailing offers for exclusive interviews. I turned off my phone, left the house keys on the counter,
no map,
and drove.
Just open road and a quiet ache that needed space to breathe. I ended up 4 hours west, where the air turned dry and the sky felt bigger. There was an old ranch out there I hadn't visited in nearly 15 years. George used to love it. A slice of land where nothing ever seemed to change, where the silence wasn't heavy. It was holy. I parked the car beneath the windmill, stepped out, and listened. No engines, no sirens, no lawyers, just wind brushing over brush, and the occasional chirp of something wild in the grass.
And for the first time in weeks, I remembered who I was, not the victim, not the mother of the accused, not the headline or the court transcript or the woman whose coffee cup got swapped. Just Margaret, just a woman who survived. And somewhere deep inside me, I realized something. Surviving wasn't the end of the story. It was only the start. I stayed there for a while, tended to the fences, cleaned out the shed, walked the fields with my boots caked in dirt and my mind slowly quieting from months of noise. I didn't think about Heather's eyes, glossy with practiced tears. I didn't think about Nathan's letter, still folded in my drawer back home. I thought about my grandmother. She raised me after my parents died young. A hard woman with soft hands who always said, "When people show you who they are, don't flinch, don't argue, just walk away with your dignity and let their shadows chase them, not you." That memory held me steady, because that's what this entire journey had been about, not just survival, but walking away without carrying their darkness with me, letting their poison stay in the cup they poured, and not letting it stain my soul. Harrison called on the 5th day. I finally picked up. "Thought you died," he said. "Just remembered I'm alive," I replied. He chuckled softly. "You sound better." "I am." There was a pause. Then his voice lowered. "The trial date's set." I closed my eyes. 3 months from now, it'll be public. The DA is confident, especially with Heather's cooperation. She's fully flipped. They're recommending minimum sentencing for her in exchange for full testimony. "And Nathan?" He sighed. "If it goes the way it's heading, he's looking at 15 to 20. The number hit me like a cold wave, not because I didn't expect it, but because that was still my son, the boy I sang to sleep, the boy who brought me dandelions and called them flowers, now being charged for trying to erase me, for money. I didn't know how to grieve that, not in words, so I didn't. "I'll be there," I said, "for the trial." I figured, I won't testify unless I have to. You won't have to. Your statement, the forensic reports, the recordings, it's airtight. Good. Another pause. Then he asked what no one else had dared to. "Do you still love him?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out over the dry plains, watched the golden grass sway under the breath of the earth itself. "Yes," I said at last. "But I don't trust him, and I don't mourn him."
"That's the hardest kind of love," he said. "I know." Back at home, things were quieter. The house felt less haunted. I started taking down the photos, not in anger, but because they no longer told the truth. I packed them in boxes, along with the trophies, the old report cards, the wedding frame that once sat on my piano. I didn't burn them. I'm not vindictive. But I needed the walls to breathe again, to reflect the life that remains.
In their place,
not
I
the
hung
one that
pictures of
turned on me.
landscapes, wide open skies, waterfalls, dusty paths through ancient forests, places I hadn't seen yet, but wanted to. And with each nail I drove into the drywall, it felt like a reclamation of my home, of my peace, of my story. Because that's what betrayal does. It tries to rewrite who you are. But survival picks up the pen and starts again. People asked if I'd ever speak to Nathan again. I told them the truth. If he stood in front of me, asked me to look into his eyes and believe it was all a mistake, I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't slap him or collapse into his arms. I would simply say, "I see you now, clearly, finally." And then I would walk away, because the greatest revenge is not punishment, it's peace. And I earned mine, every quiet second of it. I didn't go to the sentencing, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood the difference between closure and revenge. Closure doesn't come from watching the people who harmed you be punished. It comes when you stop giving them permission to exist inside your mind. So on the day my son stood before a judge and listened to a sentence that would take away the next 17 years of his life, I was in a different courtroom entirely, one with no walls, no jury, no cameras. I was walking barefoot through the ranch fields, the spring wind kissing my skin, my body warm beneath a sweater that smelled faintly of George's cologne. I was hearing the creak of the wooden fence, the flap of a hawk's wings overhead. I was sitting in the quiet, praying not for his freedom, but for his awakening, and for mine. People always imagine that when justice is served, the pain goes away, but it doesn't. Justice is not a balm. It's a boundary. It doesn't heal. It just stops the bleeding. And once it does, you're left with the wound itself, still there, still aching. But at least now, you can treat it properly. And for me, that meant doing something I'd never done before. Living just for me. I sold the big house, the one Nathan always imagined would be his someday. I gave away the furniture, donated the art, even gifted the Steinway grand piano to a music school for kids who couldn't afford one. I kept only what I loved, books, photographs of places, not people, the wedding ring George gave me, and a single coffee cup, not the one she poisoned. That one was destroyed during the investigation. But another one, plain white porcelain, no gold rim, no inscription, just a simple cup I'd bought at a roadside diner 20 years ago. It reminded me of mornings before all the noise, before inheritances and lawyers and betrayal, before Heather's perfume drifted through my kitchen like poison disguised as charm, before Nathan forgot who he was. That cup had held peace once, and I was determined to let it hold peace again. I moved to the ranch full-time, hired a caretaker to help with the land, planted rosemary and lavender near the kitchen window, woke up with the sun, started keeping a journal again. Not about the past, about dreams, places I wanted to go, things I wanted to build, people I might meet who wouldn't want my name or my land or my signature on a check. People who would sit with me not because they wanted something, but because they saw me. Truly. On the first Sunday of the new month, I was invited to speak at a local women's circle. Small town gathering, nothing fancy. Just a handful of women who'd heard the whispers, read the headlines, and wanted to hear the story from the woman who had lived it, not the version on the news. But I told them I wouldn't speak as a victim. I would speak as a witness, to survival, to intuition, to what it means to still be here. I stood in that barn-turned community hall wearing jeans and a pressed shirt. No pearls, no makeup, just my voice. And I said, "You can survive anything if you trust your gut and protect your peace. You can lose your child, your name, your reputation, and still come back stronger if you don't give away your worth to the people who tried to break you." The room was silent. Some women cried. Others nodded with that quiet kind of grief only women who've been betrayed by family can understand. And when I finished, I didn't get applause. I got hugs. I got thank yous. I got women slipping me folded notes with their own stories. A sister who stole everything. A daughter who accused her mother of things that never happened. A husband who emptied the bank accounts and left one morning without saying goodbye. Pain echoes. But healing? Healing answers back. And that day, I felt the answer. It whispered in me like wind through grass. "You're not alone anymore." The first time I heard from Nathan again was 2 years into his sentence. A letter, no return address. But the handwriting was his, still careful, still neat, still trying to be the boy he thought I wanted to see. I stared at it for hours before I opened it. There was no apology this time, no excuses, no performance, just one sentence that stayed with me. "Every morning I wake up knowing that your silence is the loudest punishment I've ever received." I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because the version of him that once belonged to me no longer existed. He died the day he let someone else carry a tray with poison on it into my home and didn't stop her. What sat behind bars was a man shaped by that silence, and whatever journey he needed to take toward redemption, he would have to walk it without me. I started traveling again. Not grand adventures, not planes or crowded airports, just long drives through small towns where no one knew my name, places with diners that served coffee that didn't come with expectations, places where I could write, places where I could sit under a porch roof and listen to storms roll in without flinching, because I wasn't afraid of storms anymore, not after what I'd lived through. I'd been struck already and survived. Now I could watch the thunder with respect, not fear. People still ask me sometimes if I regret not fighting harder to repair the family, to heal the bond. But here's the truth. Some families can't be healed, not because they're broken beyond repair, but because they were never built on truth to begin with. Mine was a house made of performances, of expectations, of smiles that covered secrets. And when that house burned, I didn't just walk out of the ashes. I built something better on the quiet ground that remained. Something smaller, simpler, more real. I built a chosen family. There's a girl named Hope who brings me fresh eggs every Sunday. She's 19, wild hair, smells like horses and homemade soap. She stays and talks, tells me about school, asks me about recipes, calls me Miss Margaret with a sweetness that's never forced. She doesn't want anything. She just likes me. There's a man named Eli down the road who helps mend my fences. Widower, quiet, steady hands, no interest in drama. Just someone who shows up with a hammer and stays long enough for the coffee to cool. We don't talk much, but when we do, it's real. And then there are the letters from women.
dozens of them now.